Hi everyone, welcome back. We're going to do part two of the themes, purpose, and functions evaluations PowerPoint. And let me share screen real quick before I continue so I don't forget. Um, I went ahead and pulled up your homework assignment for the game of limes. So I want you guys to make sure that you're copying these questions and you're putting them down into the text box. But remember what you're going to be doing is meeting word count. So if you look here, this is what you need to copy. Okay, this anytime it's falling under assignment. So read articles in Module 1 and go over themes, purpose, function, evaluation, PowerPoint, and or watch the provided lecture, which is what you're doing right now, in your module that corresponds to answer the following assignment. So using your imagination, write a 300 to 500 word essay about the image. Think about form, content, and context. Now, those were covered in the What is Art lectures. So remember, we were talking about form, right? And we've been talking about it with this one too, but form is what the material is made out of. Um, and it's very objective, so you're describing it, right? Then you're talking about your content, which is subjective, so the meaning behind what is there in the artwork, and the context, which is in our case, we're talking about like when it was created and the location and things like that. So in this particular uh, image, I want you to tell me like what time of day you think it is. What do you think happened? What was the scenario? What colors are being used? Do you recognize any kind of textures? And I'm not saying answer all of those things. I want you to talk to me. I want you to give me a narrative, what your imagination sees, not what I'm telling you is there, okay? But I do want you to keep in the back of your mind form, content, and context, because this is your first opportunity to start talking about an artwork only through observation. Okay, so don't get too carried away with finding out factual stuff if you start to do research over it, because I really want to see where you're going to go with it. Again, I want your imagination. I don't want all of the necessarily facts about this, just what you want to create. Okay, I want to see how powerful his image is. Okay, so again, I just wanted to go over that right out of the gate, because oftentimes people, when they see things like this, like, what, I'm not sure exactly what you want to see. I just want your imagination, just you write. Okay, all right, so let's go ahead and go back to our lecture. All right, so we left off talking about art for public and personal expression. Okay, so usually we're talking about commemoration when we're talking about public art. Oftentimes, not always, but it's not uncommon to see memorials or historical figures that are casted in bronze. Um, uh, but we also have that self-expression where it's like, oh, I'm going to create something lovely, to sit outside. Maybe it's a kinetic sculpture or something like that. Doesn't necessarily commemorate anything, and maybe it's not even used for public viewing. Maybe it's a personal expression, right? But we all have a profound need to remember and show respect for those that have gone before us. That's where commemoration comes in, because it holds the memories of those people that were important to us in our lives. And again, that can also mean, when I say personal to us, it could also mean patriotic. It could mean, local, regional, or even global, right? So commemoration is more often a public act, and it often celebrates a particular person, event, or a patriotic action. So when we look here at the Taj Mahal, a lot of people are not aware that this was actually a commemorative tomb to our Jahan's favorite wife. And people can still go there today, and visit this incredible symmetrical building, known as the crown of the palace, the Taj Mahal. This work right here is a painting, a historical rendition of the military battle of 1759, in which the British Army defeated the French General Wolfe. And I'm going to try not to dissect it too much, but if we look at it, you can see that there are three groups of individuals, right? We have the gentlemen that are here, we have the group here in the center, and we have another group over here. And all of these image or figures are lined up in such a way that their bodies and the placement of their arms and legs kind of curves around this way, right? And this one right here kind of curves us back around, and this kind of catches us and brings us down into the central figure. The color red kind of pops out enough that it demands attention to us, right? We have this kind of atmospheric perspective of the smoke, things that were burning, the world on fire back behind there, okay? But we have to sometimes look at, not just the subject. Okay, yeah, it's a military battle, the death of General Wolfe, but, I'm sure that these people were not staged like that, right? I mean, of course not. But the artist has to create this dramatic flair to pull us around the composition, the chaotic movement, almost, mimicking in the grouping of the figures as we move around. And these intense reds that pop at the dramatic energy that we see, it demands attention, right? But again, as a commemorative work, it can be historical, it can be realistic, or it can be dramatized, to get the point across, right? So chances are he was not swooned over like this, and everybody wearing nice, clean, pristine outfits, and here's your wonderful little Native American off to the side here, just kind of, all calm and posed, right? So the artist's imagination allows for the storytelling to take place and what he envisions, and he brings this world to us so we can have empathy towards the scene, what has taken place, because his use of knowledge of paints and things such as elements and principles, right? But his imagination provided that for us, right, in this commemorative work. So Maya Lin, she has created the Vietnam Veterans Memorial there in Washington, D.C. in 1982. I was fortunate enough, I went this past April to Washington and saw it in person, and it was absolutely incredible. We had also a smaller version of it that toured through Laredo, and that was like right before I went, the Wall That Heals. And our city hosted that, and I was so happy that we did that, and I got to see it prior to going, because um, uh, it prepared me mentally before I got there, because this work was so intense, right? But Maya Lin, she's created this V-shaped chevron cut into the landscape with names all on black granite. All the names that you see there are uh, the names of these veterans who perished, or they were missing in action. And but it wasn't an easy journey to get here, and again, just to look at an artwork, a commemorative work, in person, and to know the history of it, and to finally see it. I I was so overwhelmed, because it is better than just sitting talking about it abstractly. But the history behind it was sad, because Maya Lin, well, first off, she was answering a call to an assignment. It was out, she was an architect student. It was out to everybody to commemorate a piece to our veterans coming back from Vietnam because we weren't really nice to them when they got home and we had to make amends. Okay. We had a lot of protests. A lot of people didn't want us in Vietnam. And so when our soldiers returned wounded, they weren't supported or loved the way they should have been at first, because of all the protests. And so, I mean, we had a lot of damage to make amends for. And so this piece wins the competition against veteran artist, against other people that were older. She was just 21 years old, and it was profound. And as we look here, you go walking onto it and you go down into the ground. I didn't realize the impact I would feel walking down, seeing these names that are listed chronologically, from day to day to day to day. But each day then is alphabetical on who died or was missing in action. Um, there were so many names. I was so overwhelmed, all the way till the very last day, as what we can see here. It was intense. Over 58,000 names there. You talk about a commemoration. Definitely. This was not like one statue that said, hey, to all those that died, right? But the problem is that with this, people protested that they didn't like it because it didn't have a traditional statue that commemorated, right? So what they did is they compromised. And this is the first time that I'm actually showing these because these are from my when I photographed. Um, and so this is the group of the nurses that were there, and there were so many people. Here you can see a gentleman, a veteran, and a woman was escorting him or chaperoning. I don't know what you call it, but his caregiver brought him there, and he was very emotional. And if you look, you can see that there's a bunch of ponytail holders, like little rubber bands that were uh, left there at the nurse's statue. And that was a little fact that I didn't know. And letters and flowers and things, because over at the main um, uh, wall that we see here, there's a ledge that runs alongside. And every day they come by and pick this stuff up, and then they go and archive it. Um, and it's a living monument. It's every day. But I never thought about these statues that were out here that also people were leaving these trinkets in commemoration of all those that passed away or were missing in action. And these are life size. They're huge. Actually, I think they're a little bit bigger than life size, but the emotions that you see are pretty intense. And I just happened to catch this child, leaning in, on the wall, touching these names because they're all engraved in there. And it's just incredible. It was very powerful. And I wish that I could have stayed a little bit longer, just to absorb the experience a little bit more, but very intense commemorative piece. Now, I mentioned, that she or she answered an assignment. It was a call to artists. Um, we all, as a nation, have not always been able to support artists' ventures, but we knew how important it was as a nation. And in 1967, Congress created the National Endowment for the Arts. And you need to know that for your test, okay? So, 1967, with the National Endowment for the Arts that opened up funding, taxpayer money going into it, that we were able to establish funds for public use. Um, let's say you want to build a new library for your community, you can apply to the National Endowment for the Arts for 1% of your funding, your budget, just to make it artistic looking, just to bring art in, to pay for art to make it more beautiful, because it's serving the public, right? Let's say that you are a dance team and you need to travel someplace for an event. You can apply to the National Endowment for the Arts, who can supply scholarships and funds and donations and things and grants to take your team, to where you need to go. I mean, these are taxpayer money that's there, to support the arts. Now, I know we're talking about the visual arts, but it's also including literary work. It's, poetry, writing novels, those things. Anything that's serving the public, okay, the civic realm, you can apply for the funds. You don't know unless you know that that entity is there. So the National Endowment for the Arts, though, is always on the chopping block every year about national budget. It's kind of like if you don't use it, you lose it kind of thing, right? We know art is important, but again, if you don't know that it's there, you can't apply for it. And one of these days, or you may be already be seated at the table where you're making these big decisions of building forward in your communities. And this is a resource for you, right? So another reason why I love teaching this class is because, I know that I've got future leaders, that are going to have so many good resources to promote the arts. And so tap into the National Endowment for the Arts. But again, you need to know this year, 1967, and you need to know that that 1% program exists, okay? Now, we move on to art as self-expression. Oh goodness, we could have pulled any art in here, okay? But this just happens to be one that I've talked about for many, many years. Because it's dealing with the loss of identity. The artists sometimes are just they face every day, especially if they come from another country and they're living in another country. It's like you're in America, but you're not. You are. You can't ever go back home because now it's not the same. I hear so many people tell the stories, not just from Mexico, but also from Iraq or from China. That Japan. That coming to America is great. But they struggle. With the shifts, right? And then they don't feel like they fit in at home or they fit in here. And this artist is who I'm talking about as one of those individuals. So born in Korea, raised in California. This work called Dwelling has these personal items that were actually made into a Korean style dress. And then it's got all these books and maps and photographs about Korea, right? But inside the dress, you've got some poetry written that gives voice to the loss of identity. And this is a direct statement about a common sense of lost identity to those in the United States born elsewhere. And right now we've got the hot topics of immigration and but there's that flip side of, okay, people get here and then what, right? It's I mean, we are made up of such an eclectic group of individuals. It's such a beautiful place to live, and we're all just trying to find our own way. And art is that self-expression that it can allow for you to have some type of control over, your experiences. So the Impressionists also, if we kind of go back in time a little bit in the 19th century, late 1800s, early 1900s, the Impressionists were fighting against those traditional painters of, oh, you're saying I can't have my work shown, that this is only art, but we want to say more with our paint than just painting like what now a camera can do, because the camera's been around by this time, for at least 60, 70 years, because uh, we have our camera image, our first burned images in 1826. So that kind of messed with artists, because now you could hold a camera, take a picture. Okay, it's taken some time, okay, but you can take a picture and then it's already there for you, lifelike. So what did that do for painters who were copying what was life? Is allowed them to do something else, like maybe it's brushstroke, or maybe it's using a new pigment. Maybe they're going to try to make it feel like it's that scene without making it hyper realistic. They were being expressive in their work. They were studying light and texture and paint, and and it's an exciting time because it's also about color theory, and putting color combinations and finding compositional space. And I mean, they really were like your scientists in the field of art and playing, but it was all through self-expression, trying to find their direction. Incredible, incredible time. And that gave permission for artists later, because we look here in 1913 with Kandinsky, he was allowed to push these boundaries into abstraction. And we've already looked at a Kandinsky in our previous chapter, right? Our previous PowerPoint, but we wouldn't been able to get here without those artists in the past being brave enough in their expression. And we almost have that permission to push the boundaries even into another direction. It's quite exciting, but Kandinsky in this work hoped that the souls of the viewers would resonate with the rhythms and colors of his paintings and infect viewers with the same emotions that he felt when creating them. Again, this is an abstract. He was thought to be an abstract expressionist, but sometimes people go, oh no, that's non-objective. It's on. No, this one is not non-objective because he's telling us, these are stringed instruments, and you can hear the rhythm. He's telling us. Now, while I was in Washington, and this may seem completely out of context, but this was another reason why I wanted to start redoing all of my PowerPoints and create new recordings, is because when I went to Washington, there was at an art conference, I realized it's time for me to update a little bit. And I actually took a little time to myself while I was there, and went to a galleria that was across from my hotel. And I walked in, and there was an exhibit that had all of Paul Stanley's paintings and sculptures in the Wentworth Gallery. And I was kind of taken back. I was like, oh, um, okay, this is an interesting venture. But while I was there, the gallery curator owner, she comes up to me and tells me that in about 2 hours, Paul Stanley himself was going to be there to talk with people who were purchasing his artwork. Well, of course, I couldn't afford his work, so I sent an email or a message, asking, if it was okay if, because I couldn't meet him personally, if I could talk about his art, because, art is extension of self, right? It is that expression of who you are and who you've become. And if you're familiar with Kiss, the rock band, they made their career, starting in the 70s, and it's loud, but they've fit in every genre. And whether you like them or you don't like them or whatever, it doesn't matter. But they've been around for a long time, and now we see Paul Stanley himself, who has taken his music and now has thrown it into his artwork. And it's electric and loud, and we can see that he's using multiple medium. He's got some bling bling because they really were some of the first in the rock group to make it cool, for guys to be wearing, all of the bling blings and stuff like that. So they were also in the disco era, and then the 80s with the big hair, and they've just kept alive, right? Most people know Gene Simmons too, right? So I'm really happy to be able to pull them in because I did get a response. It wasn't necessarily a permission to have like a one-on-one discussion, but that I did not receive a no about getting to use some of his images for my PowerPoint. And he has so many different artworks that are out there that you can go purchase and stuff too. But it was really interesting because again, to see that artist who went from one medium of music and his life that way to be able now to put it out onto a canvas or into a sculpture. He does acrylic guitars, and then he paints on them as well too, and then he adds bling bling and so forth. So really good self-expression. Absolutely example. All right, so that leads us to art for spirit. Um, all societies produce objects that communicate beyond words, that meet physical, spiritual, or aesthetic need. So, in many societies, the arts have this spiritual component. It's an integrated part of a ritual. Like if you take communion, you have a beautiful chalice cup, right, and so forth. The way that you hold yourself in church, when you look over and you see beautiful windows, that have these beautiful images, or when you're looking at a beautiful painting, right, there's a lot of iconography. But you feel a certain way when you look at something, when you're wearing a cross as a necklace, right, or it has a deeper meaning for you, possibly, right? So, but people have used their best skills um, to create, these precious things. And especially if you're trying to pay tribute to your God or goddess, right? Your creator, or universe, right? You don't just go say, oh, okay, I'm going to use this because that's all you're worth. No, you go use your most rarest and precious materials, and you utilize the best skills possible, right? Your talents. So when we look at works like this happens to be the Tree of Jesse at the Chartres Cathedral. This was the beginning of understanding stained glass and being able to hold it within architectural walls, so it closed up the opened clear stories that allowed for birds and weather and everything else, but still allowed for light to come in. You could close that, and the lights come in. But those beautiful colors, are making picture books and telling stories that support what the teachings were within that environment. Because your cathedrals were your first universities. They were your first places of education, because they wanted to unite everybody on the same ideologies, and they wanted to make their communities better. But you are talking to a society that couldn't read the Bible, right? And it's not like they had access to a bunch of Bibles. They couldn't just go to the store, right? Because they were handwriting them all for the longest time until printmaking came along and they were able to print pages. But for now, these were their picture books. These were their stories. These were their words, the art that was around them, okay, to reinforce the teachings within this environment. And that's the first thing you do when you're learning how to read as a child, is you've got a picture book and it's got little words on it. Apple, orange, right? And you've got a picture that tells you what those are. So same thing. Now we look here and just flipping from Western ideology to Eastern philosophies, right? And so we've got a Zen garden, and the environment that's around here, the spacing, the way that the rocks are organized, this kind of meditative process of just, moving things around, right? So here we can see that they appear random, but for the most part, they are organized. And these protrusions seem to imitate the most minimal version of nature. And then we've got Stonehenge. Stonehenge is just this great mystery. We don't know why it's there. We can guesstimate why it's there based on some of the other religions that we do have evidence and knowledge of, and try to appropriate those with association of Stonehenge. But we're so fascinated with it. We believe that it is created for a spiritual or ritualistic purpose because the way that they are positioned. Okay, if we think about the way that we have celestial bodies, okay, it actually aligns with some of our solstice. So we've got the heel stone here. Here's the altar stone, but these things were huge. It's not like you could just, put a couple of rocks up there. Let me see if I can back up and where you can really see how huge these things are. Here's some people. Okay, there's people. And so when you think about how tall that is, and then they had to put this megalith on top in the post and lintel systems, right? These things are huge. And this is the Neolithic period, right? This is a labor of love. And then on top of that, that they took time to dig out this huge, massive circular ring in the earth, to create these mounds, and then, place things in such a way in the circular manner, um, and then aligning celestial bodies. I mean, is that all just because they wanted to? Oh no, we have to assign it. Hopefully, we're not being too ethnocentric, right? But we do feel that it had some kind of ritual involvement. But anyway, so it aligns in sync with solar and lunar movements. Now, for your test, I want you guys to remember that it's associated with Merlin from the legend of King Arthur. Okay, so speaking of the circle, take another one as an example of art with the mandala, or mandala. I've heard it called either one, but that's a geometric or pictorial design, usually enclosed within a circle, but can be a square, by the way, but it's representing the entire universe. And it's oftentimes used in meditation and ritual with Buddhism and Hinduism. But we see it bridged all across, literally since prehistoric. We've been fascinated with spirals and circles. And so Carl Jung, who was a contemporary of Freud, focused in on archetypes and particular symbolisms that seem to be kind of ingrained in us, and that we continually use, and how we respond to those types of things like lines and shapes and colors and so forth, right? And archetypes of male and female and things like that. So Carl Jung was stating that the circle and even the sphere, but primarily the shape of the circle, represented the self and harmony of the individual. So when we look at this one right here, it's not just a circle, it's got a square in the inside of it. It's the medium. And this is sand, colored sand. Okay. Now, this one was created in 1997, The Wheel of Time. It took 3 months, 3 weeks, 18 hours a day of just pouring sand. That's what they're doing, just pouring sand. That's it. And it wasn't adhesive or anything. It was just poured. So at the end of the completion of it, they would then celebrate it for, a short duration of time and then destroy it. And that was to symbolize the impermanence of life. That yes, live it, do it, experience it, but we all we all are going to fade away. We're all, it's all going to be gone one day. And so how you fill it up, what you do with your life, right, is what matters. All the colors of it. So here we can see them actually pouring the sand. Now, this is prior to COVID, so them wearing masks is strictly so they don't breathe heavy and mess up the design. You're spending all that time creating these amazing uh, pieces. It's kind of sad to think that you could blow it away by a sneeze or a deep breath. Okay, here we have another work. This one is the dance wand in honor of Issue. And the image would get hooked over the shoulder, and the participant would, move around, dance around, and you could hear the ching ching of the shells clacking, but the imagery itself, is part of the storytelling of wearing this object, that is embediment or embodying, I should say, all of your traditions, right? So, and also to help attract the gods, saying, "Hey, look at me." I talked about earlier being Native American, and our regalia is very colorful. Seminoles have patchwork, and one reason is because these bright colors were thought to say, "Hey, God, we're still here. We're still worshiping you quietly." Whenever they had their um, uh, lands and traditions taken, the clothing still allowed for them to say, "Hey, we still value you." So these types of rituals are, again, a way to connect to creators, right? Okay, so now we move on to our last theme, which is, or I should say purpose and function, but themes, right, of art for political purposes. Persuasion, protest. Okay, just campaigning alone, right, should tell you enough, because you can look at somebody who's got a poster using certain colors with their image, and they're depicted a certain way. That is a way to persuade you that they're an honest, friendly, just person, and you need to vote for them, right? Or if you see somebody with a picket sign, and it's red and jagged, and it's holding up, and it's maybe got an image of an animal on it that looks like it's bleeding, you obviously know that that is a message of a protest in, against animal cruelty or something, right? I mean, these are visuals that are already ingrained in us. So when we look at something like this, we think of the context. This is early first century in Rome, and we're looking at Augustus the Prima Porta. Um, we view it a little bit different. You may go, "Oh, that's Caesar's Palace in Las Vegas," right? Because you see this image everywhere, right? They've got copies of him, his statue everywhere. But at the time, the Augustus the Prima Porta, this rendition, um, somebody would come up and see it, and they would recognize the fact that this guy is a just leader. He's got his battles, he's also kind, but he's an authoritative figure, right? But like your dad or your protector. And you don't challenge his leadership, because if you do, you are going to upset the gods. Because if you look down here with the iconography, you're going to see this little Cupid on a dolphin. And this was the symbol of Venus's lineage. And so Augustus of Prima Porta actually claimed to be the descendants of Venus. And if you go against him, you're going to go against her and that lineage, and don't do it, right? So this was to persuade people not to challenge his authority. So this work right here, This is just an image, it's an oil painting, but this is a rendition of Versailles. Okay, so Versailles is an amazing palace there in France, and Louis the 14th began the construction of it. This palace had formal gardens. It had, the latest in architectural innovation, because France wanted the world to go to them, right? The world centered around them, and King Louis the 14th was actually called Royal Soleil, sorry, Roy Soleil, which was, your sun king, sun god, right? And so, the sad thing is that he was pumping so much money. Okay, and we had the new world. People were sending troops, or not troops, but sending men over to stake claim, for colonies and stuff in over here in the new world. France is starting to go bankrupt because they're also experiencing famine, and they're taxing people more, and then they got all the battles, going on with all these other countries, at different times. And so France is slowly going bankrupt. So by the time Louis the 16th becomes power, comes into power, very young, when him and uh, sorry, An- Annette, oh, sorry, oh, Marie Antoinette. Okay, Marie Antoinette, when they became king and queen, um, you end up with the French Revolution. But during the time of when Versailles is being created, the King Louis the 14th and 15th, they wanted to make sure that people would see Versailles and go, France's power. We don't know what you're talking about. We're not going bankrupt. You're crazy, right? You don't have an advantage over us. And people would go there and they say, wow, well, the rumors are wrong. I don't know what they're talking about. France is awesome, right? And, because he had to keep up the facade himself, right? Or themselves. So again, it was persuasive that they were the powerhouse of the world. And it's sad to see that it crumbled with the French Revolution, and your royal families were killed. Now, this work right here was actually used in the initiation ceremony for girls on the verge of adulthood. So right away, we've got something that's ritual, art for spirit. But in this case, we're looking at it as being persuasive, because we have to be able to convince the community that this person is now becoming a woman. Okay, so objects are being utilized as a way to solidify their meaning, to persuade the culture into recognizing this individual in a different way. So, of course, there's some iconography involved. Symbolizes prudent behavior and the ability to keep secrets. And then you have the rings around the neck, the fleshy curves, like attractive women. Stylized hair, the beauty and the presence of friends to help in grooming. And then the little iconography, that turtle on the top, right, is the secrecy of the initiation ceremony. Right, so very interesting. Now that leads us into protest. Protest right here, definitely we can tell global warming. We humans, mankind, are responsible for global warming. That's what this image is telling us, right? So protest is one of our rights as a community. If you want to see change, again, through protests, you can be persuasive, right? And this happens to be informative, right? But also used as kind of a statement, a direct statement that is very powerful by the use of color and imagery. Now, this work right here, it doesn't seem very big when you look at it like this, but I want to point out something. It is 216 inches by 216 inches. Okay, now to kind of put it in perspective for you, I'm 5'6", so you know, when you put that in inches, how many is that? 66 inches, right? So I'm only 66 inches, so average height, whatever. So imagine 216 inches by 216 inches. So even though it's laying down this way and across this way. Okay, but this was a direct statement because the artist was protesting against certain court decisions in areas of voting and election, or voting rights and election districting that the artist saw as harmful to African Americans. So he felt that the court was moving in an unfruitful ideological direction. So again, it's like watching uh, the world, because we're looking at this map, stretched out across this canvas, and it's crumbling, right? It's like watching our pillars of society and lawmaking, just crumble. And a very powerful statement in a way that the artist is feeling they're protesting a certain situation. So, in conclusion, art can inspire, inform, persuade, entertain, transform, deceive, humiliate, anger. It can arouse emotions, spark our imaginations, delight our senses, right? And of course, just to sum up, daily use, visual delight, communicating information, public and personal expression, art for spirit, and political purposes. You need to know all of those for your test. Okay? All right. So thank you for your attention, and we will end this presentation.